I'm Premesh Lalu. I want to invite John Mowitt to lead us in the first discussion.
Thank you very much, Premesh. Thank you all for coming to this. And I'm going to emphasize listen simply because one of my obsessions currently is sound and sound art. So I'm not going to show anything. I'm going to force you to listen. I understand that that can be a challenge and difficult and whatnot. I get that. I do think, though, that if it becomes a difficult question for you, let me know. I will listen. Okay, it seems to me it's fair. What am I working? I'm writing a book now, basically on the idea of tuning. One of the reasons I was so inspired by Reza's work on the Palmoid system was because we were sort of on the same page. But I'm coming at it through this German philosophical concept of Stimmung, which gets variously translated, and I'm sort of approaching it as though, well, it really comes down to attunement, and that's why it supports another version of a translation, which is that of harmony. What's wrong with that is that harmony always sounds like it's about a chord, and it's not. It's about voicing. It's about the way you're arranging spatially the distribution of melodic material. So why think of it as harmony as such? But anyways, that's sort of where I'm starting from. So I'm going to be bearing down on some things that have a lot to do with issues of sound. And I've decided to back up into a very early part of my work, specifically a book I wrote on percussion. And I developed there this concept which I'm working with here, the subjection of human agency. And part of what I was just trying to get a hold of is that this idea that a drum kit or an arrangement of drums and the drummers is not helpfully thought of as musician and musical object. We need to get at some way in which these are actually working with each other. And I was thinking about it in terms of some of these big political themes about freedom and subjection and autonomy and expression and whatnot. So I'm coming back there, and I'm coming back actually to what I would call an outtake from percussion. It's a bit of material that I didn't actually include. And I'm hoping that you will bear with me as I'm going to read through two poems, just so we get the aesthetic back on the table. And the first of these poems is a poem called Little Man, Little Drum. Perhaps the most interesting thing about the poem is that it was written by Karl Marx in 1837. And this is the poem. A drum, it is no man. A man, he is no drum. The drum is very clever and the man is very dumb. The drum is tied with straps, but the man is on his own. The drum sits firm when the man falls down. The angry man, he beats it, and the drum it sounds. Yes, the merry drum it rattles, and the man it bounds. Now, I've forced that rhyme there because the German doesn't quite line up in the way it should. And what was done in the original English translation just doesn't work. Following stanza. And then the man pulls faces. The drum, it laughs at him. And the man shouts up and down the house and makes an awful din. He drum, ho drum, why laugh so mockingly? You take me for a fool and you stick your tongue out at me. Damn you, drum, shame me. You jeer and you deride. Why'd you rattle when I beat? Why do you hang where you were tied? You think I raised you from a tree into a drum full grown to carry on like this as if you'd done it on your own? Yes, you shall dance when I beat. You shall beat when I sing. You shall cry when I laugh. You shall laugh when I spring. The man sculls at the drum, all in a sudden furious bout. He bangs and he bangs and he bangs it until the blood comes rushing out. So the drum has blood. comes rushing out. And the drum has no man, and the man has no drum. And the man enters the monastery, and pious the man becomes. That's the last of it. Now, I'm just going to read the other poem, and then I'm going to say some things about this. This is from Oswald Ntishali from 72. It reads, and it's called Sounds of Cowhide Drum. Boom, boom, boom. I hear it far in the northern skies, a rumble and a roar as of thunder. I prick my ears like a buck ready to flee from the imminent storm. Boom, boom, boom. As it rolls nearer and nearer to the southern sky, it holds my heart and my hopes soaring high into the eagle's throne. Boom, boom, boom. I am the drum on your dormant soul, cut from the black hide of a sacrificial cow. I am the spirit of your ancestors, habitant in hallowed huts, eager to protect, forever vigilant. Let me tell you of your precious heritage, of your glorious past, trampled by the conqueror, destroyed by the zeal of the missionary. I lay bare facts for scrutiny by searching your mind all decorations and dogmas. Oh, hear me, child, in the Zulu dance shaking their hearts into a frenzy. Oh, hear me, child, in the night vigils of black Zionists lifting their spirits into ecstasy. Boom, boom, boom. This is the sound of a cowhide drum, the voice of Mother Africa. Now, part of what I'm interested in, obviously, has to do with the important overlap of certain themes between the two pieces, but I also want to bear down on some of the formal qualities of these pieces. So the piece by Marx, which is in a little chapbook which he dedicated to his father, who was supporting his efforts to become an attorney, failed efforts to become an attorney. And he titles this particular poem in the chapbook as a fable. And I think it's important to note that formally a fable is an aesthetic technique for generating moral insight. Right? The poem builds towards a final stanza in which a proposition is advanced. And the one that is advanced here is the one, so the drum has no man, the man he has no drum. And the man enters the monastery and pious he becomes. Okay? So that's, you're supposed to go, oh, okay, this is what this is about. And I think one of the things that you don't want to lose sight of here is this very clever way in which Marx is sort of playing with these two verbs, to have and to be. Who has what and who is what. And this is part of what I think is effective about the poem as a way of getting closer to this sense in which it is addressing, it's expressing itself to you, but it's doing it within the frame of a system of constraints. And that's part of what I'm thinking about in relation to subjection. It's the way you produce the capacity of a subject to express, but by putting frame around it such that that expression works, it's possible. Now, there would be, a lot to do, I think, in thinking about even the rhyme scheme of this particular thing, because it's otherwise a very strange one. It's sort of AA and then BB, CC, DD, and then it comes back to AA in the final, the moral point, as if you're supposed to recognize that there's some kind of resonance between drum, dumb, drum, and frum in the German, so pious. And so dumb and drum and pious all sort of are being mashed together. Here's something that Marx wants to comment on in terms of the drum man problem. Now in Shelley, there's an interesting transition that takes place. And the transition involves this sort of passing into the speaker of the boom, 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 right? So in that first stand, boom, 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 I hear it afar. So it's outside me and I'm hearing, listening. And it's in the northern skies, right? Very loaded sort of geopolitical reference, it seems to me. A rumble and a roar as of thunder. I pricked my ears like a buck ready to flee from an imminent storm. And then slowly but surely we get to this boom, boom, boom. I am the drum on your dormant soul, right? So he's now fused himself with this. And it's that point at which something that was very important in the percussion book comes out here, and that is the importance of skin. He says, cut from the black hide of a sacrificial cow. Now, in percussion, I was really fascinated with the way that the skin brought the player and the played into direct touch with each other. And I do think, I don't really want to wander off into Merleau-Ponty and the flesh and whatnot, but there's something related here. The skin is this surface that seems to fold through everything and becomes a point at which you can communicate by engaging it in the form of a certain kind of studied violence. A beat is a pattern, right? So I was thinking about these things in relation to sort of getting at how we might think about a poem as exhibiting for us certain things having to do with techniques and culture. And in particular, what I really want to bear down on here is this notion of technique as a way to think about how you work this join between technology and culture and between the subject who's expressing and those who are addressed. A lot could be said here about, the dedication of the thing to his father, the importance of the sort of political moment in which Empishali is writing, etc. But what I'm really trying to think through here has to do with this idea of getting at where the human subject, right, arises in relation to the modalities of technology thought to give it aesthetic expression. And I'm interested in this subjection problem because I'm trying to think about in ways in which we can understand through these kinds of considerations what might be going on in relation to this sense that we become subjects. So I'm thinking about subjection there, not in the sense of subjectivation as such, but becoming a subject in relation to a sort of engagement with a system of constraints. And that strikes me as opening up a set of interesting problems about, well, what exactly do we mean by technology and its impact on the human? Now, I'm thinking about the subjection of human agency as a formula that allows us to think about how human agency has to be reduced in order for a subject to arise. At the same time, in order for a subject to arise, it's essentially producing a kind of grid on which we can place something we would more normally want to call identities. So the sort of motif, obviously, that you hear all the time now about intersectionality and identity, it seems to me to have a lot to do with this idea of what is it that subjection offers as a structure on which to build identity. And what is it that subjection offers as a structure? It's a series of binary coordinations, right? Man, woman, savage, civilized, white, black, north, south. I mean, it produces this sense of it's in relation to these differences that an identity can particularize and affirm a set of possibilities about what is at stake and to what's taking place. Now, what that would suggest is that the subjection process is also a way of turning the human into something that is also likewise reduced, an echoing reduction. And that seems to me to be a way to start thinking about some of these things that have arisen even in fields like paleontology, where we start realizing that human evolution involved a lot of different species and not just the one Homo sapiens that we think, oh, this is who we are. This is our. Well, there are lots of these sorts of initiatives and beings that human agency has derived and built itself out of. So that strikes me as something that you want to kind of recognize about the formula, that it's not just talking about how does an expressive subject arise and what does it have to do with the constraints of aesthetic discourse, but how that also then becomes a way of producing a concept of the human, which strikes me as, and I'm going to make a kind of an abrupt turn here, unsustainable. It's an unsustainable account of the human, and ecologically so. It can't be sustained any further. Now, this is the kind of argument I think one finds sort of in contemporary scholarship, a lot of different places, but Timothy Morton is very useful because he keeps trying to remind us that when we think about ecology concerning itself with nature, it is producing a very shriveled idea of what nature is, such that it might be produced, salvaged. To me, there's something very important about seeing that as the corollary to the human. The human also becomes very much reduced and in an unsustainable way. If you approach this question from the kind of that sort of political vantage point that I think is, it was certainly in Tim's work, but it's also there already very early on in thinking about, to take a theme, new ecologies. It's in Gregory Bateson. So the ecology of mind thesis, right, was already a way to say, no, look, we need to get at some sense in which what we understand as those humans who are involved in sociality, there's an ecological dimension to how it is that they operate, how they think, what they're thinking about themselves, about the world, about the conditions of possibility for what these actually introduce as a set of either viable or unviable options. What Bateson was worried about, had a lot to do with affirming and developing interdependencies. We wanted things to be more open than we were inclined to accept them at the time. And he's writing in the 60s and 70s. But he's raising the stakes for us and getting us to consider that there is some specific way in which the way we pose different problems about how we think these things through are also part of the ecological problem. And for him, it's not so much, well, what resources are there to sustain this, but in what way do we want to say this kind of initiative, however, progressively minded, in what way is it making a set of assumptions which ultimately are almost Darwinian in character? What will succeed and what won't? And we're sorting between things that are the wrong choices for him. Now, I'm going to come back here briefly to kind of further elaborate this point to Marx. And since we're operating under the watchword of jumping, I will happily jump. The part of Marx that I want to come to now is not the early poetry or the drama or any of his early things on culture in this sort of narrow aesthetic sense. But I want to come back to his discussion of the machine in the Grundrisse. And I think it's useful to at least have a citation from that material to kind of spring from. And I'm going to quote a bit. It's in English. I've modified the German a little bit where I think it holds together, at least as an English expression, somewhat better. So anyways, Marx, nature builds no machines. All right, so nature is something that doesn't do that, which suggests, of course, that humans are not part of nature. No locomotives, no railways, no electric telegraphs, no self-acting mules, etc. I mean, like the list could be infinite. These are products of human industry. So he's very sharply doing a nature-human thing. Huh? natural material transformed into organs of the human over nature or of human participation in nature. These machines are organs, excuse me, of the human brain, created by the human hand. I will come back to the hand in the end. The power of knowledge objectified. The development of fixed capital indicates to what degree general social knowledge, and this is the formulation that got taken up as general intellect, has become a direct force of production, and to what degree, hence the conditions of the process of social life itself, have come under the control of the general intellect and has been transformed in accordance with it. Now, what he's sort of developing here is a nuance on the so-called labor theory of value. That is the amount of time that labor invests in producing something of value, right, that measures how much is worth, what compensation levels are possible. This was seen as, I suppose in some ways controversial, because the question was, aren't we really, when we're talking about labor, aren't we really talking about the work of a human being to make something of value, whether use or exchange? And here Marx is clearly saying, well, we're at a point now where we're making machines. He's very interested in automation. We're making machines which incorporate thought. He's not even thinking about a computer. He's just saying, in order for that thing to exist, human thought has to be part of it. Now, dead labor was always thought of as energy, the expended energy of the worker that is inscribed in the object. Well, this is something else. Now, this isn't even dead labor. This is something like the mind, what Bateson is worrying about, that is integrated into these devices and machines. Now, this is, when I said earlier it was a controversial set of assertions, it was made more so by the Italian Marxist thinkers like Paolo Virno, who saw this as opening up not just a way to understand the development of artificial intelligence. In other words, you could go so far down that path that you would be building, right, things that are thinking and thinking for themselves and thinking at your expense. But he's also interested in suggesting that, well, if that's taking place, then when we are using machines of this standard, right, we are also opening up a kind of almost utopian opportunity for this thinking, this kind of machinic processing to, and he's very interested in politics and the arts, to opening up different kinds of political thinking and also the way of thinking through aesthetic expression differently. Now, I think that you know, as much as we want to say, hey, we really need to be careful with what's going on with these AI devices, I mean, he's also saying, yeah, but the condition of possibility for its emergence contains something else in it. And that something else in it is part of what we are understanding by what might exceed human agency once not reduced to the work of subjection. So there's something, I mean, he's interested in that kind of political opportunity contained there. He's not, you know, he's not an idiot. He's not saying, you know, here it is, the utopia. He's saying, but look, there's something that's becoming available to us, and we don't want to back up and run from it, right? It might actually be an important way of thinking what is possible in this sort of broad sphere of human expressivity. Now, in Virno, you do actually see him developing a way of fusing ecology and political economy. And I mean, one would certainly say that there are different dimensions to this, but a lot of it does have to do with this kind of Greek root of the term, oikos, which is in ecology and it's also in economy. And it's this idea now of, well, okay, so how does that oikos, having that sense of being rooted in the home, in the house, how does the house sustain itself? You know, and those are big questions. That's not just, I mean, the tendency has been who rules it? You know, we worry about the tyrant. Yeah. But what's involved in sustaining a house? Or to go back to somebody like Basquiat, who had tried to answer the question, how does Paris feed itself? I mean, literally, what has to happen day after day after day after day for a city to feed itself? Right? Well, the oikos problem is a version of this. Right? And I suppose what we might say is that it invites the kind of question you might put to OpenAI, the prompts that you feed into it to get it to work for you. And it would be something like, how do you think outside of the box? How do you think outside of the house? How do you think, and you quickly are going to get to the limits of its capacity. It's like me trying to turn off Siri on my computer, right? Turn yourself off. I can't do that. Try it. You try it. You can't do that. It's got a limit. Yes. Start there. Start at the limit. So I think that there's things here that are worth sort of developing as opportunities for pursuing what you've wisely referred to as new ecologies. And that struck me as an important theme to lay down at the outset. Now, I am going to come, as I said, back to this problem of the hand. Of course, I came to it first in thinking about the part of the human body that touches the drum head. Not necessarily, there's sticks and there are all kinds of things, but there's a sense there in which that skin contact is very, very important. But you don't have to read into the tradition of Marxism long before you get to Engels's, right, the role of labor in the becoming human of the animal. And in that essay, he centers on the hand and the handicraft work that's essential to developing what he's calling the human out of the primate. So we get some sense that the hand is not just like a metaphor for thinking about contact, but it's also a way of thinking what it is that is taking place, what's happening in order for something like a human to arise. Now, I sort of thought about this in relation not simply to the older material of my own, but there's a lot of interesting work in the so-called media-archaeological field that is also trying to think about, for example, the difference between counting and accounting, or numeracy and literacy, and where we're going to settle on what role the hand might play in thinking through this set of tensions, really. And of course, it's not long before you get to clicking, selecting, pointing. The work of the hand is a percussive device that's generating these ways of thinking about how you count or you account. And it's sort of in that spirit that it came to my my subtitle, which I don't know whether that circulated or not, Pointing Fingers, Opposing Thumbs. Because there's a very good example then of how the hand ends up being a way to think about how we behave, how we act, how we do things as subjects that in some ways are always putting before us this question of, so what's happening to human agency while we are behaving, while we're clicking, while we're drumming, while we're touching, while we're beating, while we're doing a whole variety of things, which we understand as being sadly central to the history of the human organism on the planet. The distinction I was trying to get to there is what's the difference between pointing and opposing. And I think when we hear the formulations, we're thinking, opposing thumb. That's the old argument about what makes a human different from a primate. Engels isn't worrying about that. Engels is worrying about, well, in what way do you make something from nature that helps you do something that nature can't do for itself? Well, there's certainly opposing in that, but we also use opposing as a way to think about the difference between being opposite and being in contrast or contrary. And it strikes me that already in thinking the human as having something to do with that, we're siding one way or another on this matter of what do we think opposition is. Is it opposing or is it contesting? And what does contesting mean? It has to mean something that challenges the very frame of the question. And of course, pointing fingers is, it's the gesture of accusation and of judgment and of sort of critique, if you want. And I would like to also see that as something that belongs in thinking through what it is that's at stake in this process of subjection and human agency, especially as we think about the situation we're in when we're doing all this, like this place. Right? Because we are being pointed at. And those fingers are not necessarily friendly. They're certainly digits and they're digital, but they're not necessarily something that we can be comfortable with. So we have to think a little bit about, well, what does it mean to point back, right? And it's the Latin punctum. It's to poke something, to irritate it. Right? It strikes me that would be another thing to remember when we're trying to get at. So what do we mean by the digital? And what it's a form of counting. It's a form of calculating. It's a form of storing. It does things that all seem to have somewhat remote relations to direct political challenges of the form of pointing the finger at something. And I just don't want us to forget that. I think you want to keep that constantly in play. That would also suggest some things about what a university has to be. What is it for? What do you do? And as the dean was telling us, this problem of trying to get the digital capacity available to students and whatnot is one dimension of this, but we want to also get them thinking about, so what's happening to the human here? Now, I think that what she didn't say, I don't know whether it's on her mind or not, is that AI, digital technologies, are eco-disasters. They are eco-disasters. They are destroying resources. And not, water is what? Energy, land. Come on. So yeah, we want to be doing, but we got to oppose our thumb. We've got to point. There's something going on with that digital that just can't drop out, especially if you're thinking about the ecological implications of it. And what does a university need? Right? We've been apologizing for the appropriation of indigenous lands for a long time. Hey, that's only part of the problem. You're destroying them. You're just using them up. So, that aspect of it too strikes me as something you don't want to disconnect from how it is that we get to be subjects or human beings who get to have certain kinds of rights and can behave in particular ways by virtue of being subjects. That's all I really wanted to put out there.
More than we bargained. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I'm interested in where you'd locate the question of metabolic rift. And, it does seem to me that since you invoked Marx and the way in which Marx is subsequently read as an ecological thinker, there is the problem of metabolic rift that is at stake in the separation, as I understand it, between, the hand and the head, if you like, to use Emma Menkley's formulation. And I'm wondering, in the articulation of the human and technology, whether something like the metabolic rift now needs to be figured much more centrally as a concern of the humanities, let alone the university. So I wondered if you could just think a little bit in that space. I know that there's an ongoing debate about immaterial labor and so on that comes out of the Grundrisse essay.
Yeah.
But maybe we'll set that aside for a moment, because I do wonder what one does with the question of the object as well in that constellation. And, I think it's the German ideology where Marx will go, with it suddenly in the toy shop.
Yeah.
Things are moving around,
Right.
and there's a bit of magical realism that is taking hold there. But maybe even to say something about that, So those two areas that one might want to think about as we figure out what kind of relation do we want between the human and technology that might hold the potential for something like an emancipatory possibility.
I mean, it's an effort to sort of think about how in the reproduction of the current social order, understood globally, there's something being produced as part of its metabolic operation that is opening up a possibility. There's a fissure, there's a disruption there. So is there such a thing going on in the current articulation between the human and the machine that we need to think more carefully about? I mean, of course, Marx always thought that the decisive rift was the advent of communism. Why? Because all of a sudden labor was no longer going to be exploited in the way that it was. This was going to produce the conditions of a certain kind of social utopia. And so we were waiting for how precisely to facilitate something that Marx also thought was structurally determined. Capitalism will fail. It's going to fall into its own rift. Now, metabolism is also an effort now to get a hold of this sense in which, wait a minute. When you're talking like this, you're forgetting that we're talking about human beings making decisions. You're forgetting that we're talking about bodies that are going to do one thing or another under certain circumstances. So metabolism has to do with sort of rebiologizing this problematic and making it clear that, we're not, I mean, Marx sort of had it set so that structure was going to predict what human beings would do. Once it became impossible to expropriate value from the worker, that was going to force things to change. Whether the workers did it or not, it was just going to force things to change. They had a job, Lukács spent his career trying to figure this out. They had a job of trying to figure out, well, so what is the level of consciousness that the worker needs to develop in order to do the right thing in the right context? So it's got to do with this sense of, and it's a vocabulary. It's a way of getting at this biology, but also planetary rift in the sense now of something cutting through layers and sort of opening up an avenue that had been unforeseen, not foreclosed, but unforeseen, because it's beneath you. It's lower than you. So I think there's a whole bit in there that's about how it's stated that has to do with the metabolic rift problem. Now, because I'm constitutionally silly, I'm going to say it's more interesting to think about it as a riff than a rift. Because it seems to me that when you think about what a riff does, what you're talking about is a particular kind of patterned, ostinato, stubborn, right? I mean, it's going back to that sort of Nächtenkluge, obstinacy. There's something going on. Is it something that someone controls, or do even social groups control? Well, riffs are incredible. I mean, you can get 20 musicians in a space and something starts to emerge, and it's like, oh, let's go with that. It's great. And that, that's a form. I think rift still keeps trying to get at this rupture, break.
It's irreparable.
It's irreparable. You're sort of, to use another stupid locution, you're dying for it. You're dying for it. And I don't like that dramatics sort of thing. So I like riffs. stubbornness, ostinato, pointed repetition that enables, that drives things.
With your subtitle, the pointing fingers opposing thumbs, I was just thinking about um, the piano, as in the sort of Western piano, using mostly fingers and thumbs a little bit, and then the kind of African piano, if you like, the mbira, which is like all thumb.
Right.
And thinking about how it's also about knowledges, right? Knowledge based, like thinking this question through from here, like the thumb piano versus the Western piano. It's like what knowledges we have to think these questions through from here, to think differently. And then what you're saying now about the riff, I think with the thumb piano, it's all about interpolations, the notes between the notes.
Yeah.
So I don't know if there's something in that. I think there's some music experts in here that know more about that. But just to riff off your riff.
Yeah, no. Well, you see, you just did it. You just did it. I mean, that, there was a break, but it also continued and it developed. And that's that irreparable. That's a fantasy, I think. So what happened to the piano in Western music? I mean, okay, temperament emerged and it was, important, and we had to cheat because the actual intervals are not mathematically sound. But then you've got people like John Cage. They're not interested they want to get inside the thing and monkey with. So how's the tunings? How does it? So there's something that we don't want to let the piano stand for too fast, right? Because it has potential. Ryuichi Sakamoto salvaged a piano after the Fukushima disaster and decided, I'm gonna play this. So I take the point about the piano and the mbira, but I'm also saying, well, let's not go too fast down the problem of the and the piano teaches you something interesting about how we bend math and frequency to the human ear. We make these intervals, they make them work, even though they're wrong. They're just wrong. And that's why tuners are so amazing. They actually can out-hear them hearing, The other thing about the mbira too, and I learned this having purchased one without realizing what the hell I was getting into, meaning, okay, so tune it. Oh, now what? So, you're sliding, and I don't know what I'm shooting for, and so, but you end up in this interesting thing of, well, that's an interesting riff. That's tuned. It enables that. It's tuned. I'm good. And then I went to a percussion lab in town. I said, this is what I've done with this. Do you have some sense of what tuning I'm in? Do you know anything about this? And he said, you want to take a class? So it immediately turns into a transaction of knowledge, which is appropriate. I shouldn't expect to get free knowledge from walking into a lab. Anyways, I do. Yeah, it's a good question, and it opens up some questions about the hand for sure. This, right? I mean, you're using the opposition is to hold the instrument in range, so it's not exactly gripping. It's cradling, and using the cradle in order to generate something that's not possible unless you're doing that.
My name's Ralph Borland. I'm an artist. I'm doing a studio tour tomorrow, as Premesh mentioned. I was particularly interested in asking more about the metabolic rift and what it meant, because it echoed the word metabolism, which has come up in an essay I read recently by Kate Crawford, who wrote the book Atlas of AI. Yeah, and I don't know if any of you have read the essay on efflux, which is called I think it's the... I made a note of it here, but the metabolism of AI slop, and it's to do with I heard everybody, a lot of people responding when you mentioned the ecological impact of AI. So it's something that I think we're all recognizing. So it's an essay about the use of water and electricity and resources in providing the energy for all these big AI models.
Yeah.
And she also winds this into an idea of AI slop, which is when AI is poisoned on its own outputs. Yeah. So she uses the idea of AI systems as being a metabolism, having a metabolic nature, and it feeds on its own shit, poisons itself, uses up our resources while it's doing it, and we're caught up in this kind of eating and excreting machine. So it's when you mentioned metabolic and the metabolic rift, I was thinking, oh, there's probably more that's being referred to in that term that's being used than I was aware of reading it.
Except I want to say one thing. I mean, Bateson was already interested in this idea of a system that powers itself. Mm-hmm. And so he's got this idea that human thought, is metabolic in that way. And so you do care about what you're eating and what you're excreting, and what those sorts of things are in terms of what then is also being taken into the mind. Yes. A little bit weird, but I'm just saying he was thinking about this problem.
Yeah, no, I made a note of you referring to Bateson's ecology of mind, because at the moment I'm artist in residence at the Neuroscience Institute at UCT, and I'm very interested in the idea of mind and brain as being this relationship of sort of what seems less material, the mind, on top of a very material substrate, the brain, and the neuroscientists work on this physical structure which produces this not fully understood emanation, the mind. So I'm definitely going to look into that. And you also mentioned the idea of rebiologizing in terms of applying the idea of the metabolic. And it made me think of another book I've read recently, which is The Nutmeg's Curse by Amitav Ghosh. Yeah. And the way he talks about Europeans and colonialism and imperialism as creating the idea of a clockwork world, of almost like mechanizing, producing what I think of as like a machinic metaphor for how nature works. Right. And that tied into what you were saying about Marx, making me think about him opposing nature and machines. Yeah. And then thinking, well, it was also this move, though, from centuries before Marx, of applying the idea of nature as a form of machine, as a way of subjugating it. And so this rebiologizing is also interesting me as perhaps connecting to that idea of enchantment and disenchantment as well, which is what Amitav Ghosh was also talking about. Yeah, it's the first book of his I've read, but I found it really, really interesting. And just lastly, as a little add-on, because you talked about a riff as moving from riff to riff. Is a riff also playing on the idea of derivativeness as well as creativity? Because perhaps a riff is something that you could inherit from other musicians. It's something that exists already and that you reproduce. And that's something that appears in the Kate Crawford essay as well, and that I'm doing a bit of writing about at the moment, is this relationship of derivativeness, which AI automates, but then derivativeness is also being central to human creativity. It's also that we originality, it's often overemphasized. It's actually that we build on other people's work continuously. So anyway, those are just some thoughts in response to what you'd said.
Excellent, thanks. I mean, I do think that the problem with derivativeness is that I think it's an ethical term, and it's wrongly ethical, right? Because it seems to me what you're pointing to is the fact that there is nothing but composting all the way down. And so, what happens is that you get these moments where it's got something to do with community and something that catches and then repeats with deliberation, but undergoes, amazing variation, even as, right, oh, yeah, that's House of the Rising Sun. That's that chord pattern, or, that's that melodic riff that I know goes in there. That, to me, I just don't like the derivative, that ethical sense of, oh, something, was better before and something came before. Like what?
Yeah, well, I think it is central whether you take it as a derivative.
Exactly. Everything's derivative. Yeah. And so then what's the contrast? Originality? No.
I just wanted to pick on the point with where the problem of the human machine an animal, because one of the biggest debates with AI is whether it's a stochastic parrot. So it's interesting, as soon as we don't, or we want it to think like us, and as soon as it doesn't, the main critique is, oh, it thinks like an animal. It's like a parrot. It just repeats what a human says. So I think that's could be quite an interesting thing to kind of unpack, maybe.
Yeah.
Oh.
Well, I mean, let's give the parrot its due. I mean, there's something important about the way it shows you what a phoneme is. You know, you're sort of listening and you're going, oh, I see what it's saying. But it's also showing you something about the apparatus of the formation of speech that's really intelligent. It's like, I don't need what you got. I can do this. Same thing, but I got this. And that variation, it seems to me, is an intriguing aspect of what's going on there, even if we accept there's something undesirable. I mean, stochastic, you know, we've got a sense of it. Again, there's an ethical problem. But I just don't want to go too fast down the anti-parrot. I want to parrot. So I mean, the other thing is that, I mean, part of what happened when archives and libraries and what have you all went online, one of the great joys of my life disappeared, which was when you go into a library looking for X and there's Z and B, and you're all of a sudden drifting. You know, your sense of what it was that I needed, and that's important. Your need all of a sudden loses its object, and you've got a whole set of other possibilities, right? And that seems to me to be an important feature of what we're talking about with AI prompts. Can you produce things that get you to discover? I mean, it's brilliant at searching, you know, and I thought I was pretty good until I, you know, went into a big library. And you want, I mean, the thing that it can't do yet, and we ought to be wondering if it's possible, can it be surprised? Can it find something it doesn't know it's looking for? Because it's very good at you put in the prompt and it will go find. Whether it's DeepSeek or whatever, it will go, that's what it does, it scans. And it's great at doing that. And you will see things there where you go, oh, I didn't know that. And it's pedagogical in a good way. But pedagogy is also the shock of, I didn't know that. I didn't even know to ask about it. That's where we sort of want to keep saying, and you know, it's again like my question to Siri, can you turn yourself off? It's like, can you surprise yourself? Go find something you don't know that you can find. And the interesting thing about it, I mean, we were talking the other day about cybernetics, but in a sense, it's got a cybernetic logic. You're using it to do a task for you. And normally you want that homeostatic so that the task you set for it is the one you're looking for and it rewards your quest. I think we're all worried about AI turning against us. Valid worry, for sure. But I think that we also might want to push a little more on this, surprise me, excite me, find something that isn't where you're looking currently. Because it's got, you know, it's got a calculative speed that is insane. It's you know, and so let's not panic yet. I mean, good idea to go in with your eyes open, but I think too there are things that we may foreclose prematurely. That's all.
Hello, I'm Lynn. I work here.
Oh, good. I would like to.
Despite whatever people might say to you. Just to follow from what you and Kim were talking about, just a quick reminder that of course, the piano is a percussion instrument.
Yes.
That's how it produces sound. So, but I wanted to go back to the poems that with which you began your wonderful dialogue, that to have and to be, who has what and who is what. Because what you were saying about the Marx's poem reminded me of that really terrifying film, The Tin Drum,
Yes.
based on the, I think, Herman Hesse novel.
Gunter Grass.
Gunter Grass, I knew it was somebody like that. And what, just how terrifying it is, because that relation between the human and the object leads to something that is kind of counter to the emancipatory. There's something that happens to that relationship in the narrative that the boy, the tin drummer, works us through. The second one, riffing, as it were, on the Oswald Umchali, thank you for that, Sons of the Cowhide Drum. And with what Premesh was saying about relation between human and object towards something bigger, emancipatory, which is often grafted onto identity recognition, etc., as you say. Thinking through the Wada drum, which is a Venda drum, is a big, beautiful mystery in ethnomusicological worlds, because it is a drum that may not be struck. And its very meaning, its very significance in that case study is that you cannot play it. And so it buggered up, sorry, the colonials, because they were like, okay, this drum is in this cave. Something needs to happen to this drum. This drum is important, but in complete contradiction to the stereotype of the talking drum in Africa. This is the drum that doesn't talk by the usual striking mechanism, by skin on skin. So now, for me, that has wonderful opportunity in terms of absence of skin, but is this now a drum to have, or is this what the drum is? What are the constraints in terms of the bigger possibilities of emancipatory narratives that we can think through when we think of those, the unfulfillment, the unfinishedness of how we sometimes view objects?
Yeah. One of the things that's important about thinking of the drum in the cave, and whether its surface is it a mellophone or not? I mean, that's the broad category for drums that you get a sound from hitting. And it's a great example for how a certain set of assumptions about what a drum is, as you put it, buggered those who were trying to say something about it. They were just wrong. Now, the other thing is you don't want to leave out of the picture, the fact that the cave is a drum, right? So you're walking into the drum, and in effect, you're missing the point, right? Namely, you're thinking, oh, it's this that must be struck, and the fact is, you're striking the resonating chamber, right? It's like a tom on a kit that doesn't have the bottom head. You walk through it, but you've got to. It sort of creates an opportunity for reflection. Namely, what was I expecting this thing to be? And to me, that's an interesting feature of that example. In any case, but I also think, you know, when we start dealing with like sim drums and electronic drums and stuff, what is where is the point of contact? You know, you're hitting the rubber, but that's not actually making much of a sound, right? There's an electronic reception device so there's a mini echo between what you hit and what you don't hit that produces the sound. Right. So it opens up a set of issues about, all right, so where is the skin? Is there a skin? And what kind of set of assumptions do we want to make about modeling the human, right? Because I mean, ham bone is a form of beating on the body as a skinned surface, very early form, right? But here's a set of assumptions that come at you and say, okay, but keep going, keep thinking about, so where is a drum? Where is it happening? And I think that the interesting thing about the notion of a drum sounding, which is not being struck, is something that Amtishali is interested in. Boom, boom, boom. Somebody's hitting that? No. He renders it osmotically in the sense of it's like his heart, right? And the cry for liberation. He's doing that. But, once you've got this problem of, well, wait a minute, who went? No one. There is no surface. So it comes quickly to another version of this problem of what are we expecting the drum to be? And in the Marx, he's back and forth between, as I was saying, what does it mean to be the drum? And in that poem, what it means to be the drum is to be the provocation, right? The man wants to make the drum do something, and the drum's laughing at him. Right? And what does happen? The frustrated non-drummer is getting more angry, and in fact, he destroys the drum. He causes it to bleed, as though he's biologized, he's humanized the drum, and so now the drum is like he was. And then the issue is, does anyone have the drum? No one has the drum. We've got various versions of being the drum, and a drum that's not struck, and that is the voice of Mother Africa. So he's got that vague cardial, the mother's heart that is going boom, boom, boom. But is somebody striking that drum? No. I mean, just all I'm saying is that I think this question opening up here about, okay, so what do we do with a drum like that, raises a whole set of issues of the kind that I'm trying to get to, but you've given us a better example.
No, yeah, I guess, but I don't think I would have thought it through if you hadn't talked about the join between the subject expressing and those who are addressed. I think that actually prompted me to remember that this example, and it also how that join resonates back in your work on sounds on the fold between hearing and listening. Yeah.
I suppose so. In my work, I'm interested in, as you know, the hand and technique, and you mentioned technique and agency, and I was wondering if you could help me to figure out how the hand and technique and agency can have more to offer the work that we're doing in this workshop, and just to speak a bit more about it.
Yeah. No, that's fine. Although you've raised the bar impossibly high, I'm supposed to help now. I mean, I think that the key for me about technique is trying to find in that sort of philological array that gets from techne to technology, technique, etc. And technique strikes me as the place in there where we are always already acknowledging that there's a point of connection between expression, right, and the device, the expressive device. So technique becomes a way to get at, what do I need to do, right? Like palm wine plucking. I mean, it's how do I do this to get this particular kind of effect? And that's what it is it's a kind of reminder, music doesn't happen by itself. Even if it's the Aeolian harp suspended in the tree and the wind is causing the strings to vibrate, you are going, oh, that's a melody, right? So there's something there that seems important about technique, so that you get to, I don't mean who's doing it and what it's being done to. What is the means by which I'm doing that? And it is it's incredibly structured. You have to know how you want the technique to unfold in relation to a particular instrument, and what more, a composition. Talk about riff. You've got things that are, if you don't hear that, you don't know what the piece is. I mean, so you're lost. So it's a repetition device, and it's a device that says to the performer, you can't do anything you want. In other words, I as subject am subject to the constraint on my agency brought by this instrument. Now I can pick up a different instrument, or I can be a multi-instrumentalist, but it's going to apply in each case. I mean, that's what attracted me about the drum kit, right? Because I mean, when you think about its history, it's really a set of drums that were distributed amongst a field of musicians with different parts to play. That's all they were doing, and then there was somebody else, you know. So, but then you put it together, right? And you've got 4 limbs replacing 4 musicians, right? Clearly, still the problem is you can't just do anything. You've got to, I mean, even Danny Carey can't just do anything on a drum set. And that to me is what technique helps you name. Right? And it keeps in view this sense of you're subject to this particular set of constraints. Make them as expressively rich as possible. So you keep tinkering with, well, what are the constraints and how can I move things around and whatnot? And you produce, you know, communities of experimenters. People are going, hey, how do you do that? How did you tune that? Interesting. You got a core and a Celtic harp to play together. Interesting. How did you do that? So I'm just really hammering down on this idea of let's keep technique kind of in the middle here, because I do think it gets us at the pivot. And technology can very quickly get us off into the machines. And I think that's the wrong direction. That's exactly what the machine wants you to forget.
Good morning, everyone. So my question is around the statement that you made earlier on in your presentation around how does subjection offer as a structure to make one's identity, or to make one's become human, or to define one's as human. And in the usage of the word subjection, in it is there is this idea of relation. In order for you, subject to, subject with, subject of. Marx would say we are subject to capital and material and labor, and how we define ourselves as human is in relation to that. So then could we not, pulling on that thread, could we not look at us, and particularly in that evolution of technology, are we now beginning to subject ourselves or define ourselves in relation to technology? And then how does that affect our sensorial experience with technology? Like, for example, just the fingerprint that you use in order to open the phone. And how does that in turn, because now we're beginning to use the senses or the sensory experience with technology in order to provide an account of ourselves. And how does that work within this process of us attempting to define ourselves as human right now?
Yeah, let's remember that subject comes out of the Latin subjacere. What does it mean? It means to throw under, right? So the subject is what's thrown under what, right? Well, it's thrown under some being seeking to figure out, who am I? Who are we? Right? So it's got built into it this relation of something like an enabling condition and some derivation thereof. And that's where I was saying, well, identity becomes a way to do that work. And that work is not done without constraint, right? Because what's going on in the subject, as I was saying, is precisely this structuring of binary polarities. And so identity is going to say, well, there are these options, and I'm going to pick out this as what holds me up. And whatever it might be, it could be man, woman, savage, civilized, earthling, non-earth. You know, we've got the subjectivity has a whole set of built-in ideas about this, not that. And that supports this project. And it's, you know, I have a lot of respect for Crenshaw, but I think intersectionality kind of is stating the obvious, that identity is always in this sort of arrangement in relation to some enabling differentiations. Now, your other point is about well, I'm going to introduce a different term, and if you don't like it, tell me. Prosthesis. Because it seems to me that what we have done in the name of, right, trying to figure out how to have more time to be ourselves, we've tried to find means by which that can be automated, facilitated. And some of that has involved actually outsourcing the senses. And so for example, I lose my sense of you and who I'm talking to, like that, because I depend on them. They have become part of my lived experience. And this now, as you say, has manifested itself in, recognition of a fingerprint, of a face print, a code that allows you to have access to a bank account. I mean, there are lots of things that are holding parts of you where they are. And you know what it's like to lose, I don't remember it, I can't, it has agency over you. That bank will not open, no matter how many, and if you do it 3 times, it'll say, no, you're not who you say you are. So I see that there's something we need to be worrying about there, for sure. And the way I think about it is the importance of getting clear about what prosthesis enables, but also what it disables. Because there's a lot of things that do feel like, oh, okay, that's so much easier. I can find out, what my credit score is on my phone while I'm having a tea. Okay, but in what world is that useful? I mean, it keeps holding you into this place where the facility makes sense. But I think, you're getting us to wonder about, okay, so at what point does prosthesis become a political question we want to be smarter about? Now, there are conversations about this that are pretty toxic, right? The anti-COVID vaccination crowd was all about, wait a minute, I know what you're doing. You're putting something into the body that will allow us to track you and track you in ways that you're not even aware of. So we're not going to do that. And we're going to risk everybody in the name of not doing that. Chipping animals, putting so you can find this creature wherever it may be. We know that these are invasive technologies and they produce very explosive conversations about, is this okay or is this not okay? So I don't want the claim, it comes out of Simondon and others, that there's always technology as part of the human subject, to then sort of slide us off into, okay, so all these other kinds of prosthetic implants and whatnot, that's okay just because there's no human without technology? No, I think we want to have a better answer for that kind of a situation.
Hi, I'm Marcos Martins. I am a visiting scholar from Brazil, from a university in Brazil. Here at the CHR for some time. Rio. It's UERJ, the University of the State of Rio. So I guess my point has to do with the recent question and what you were talking about, this idea of reduction that you said in the beginning of your talk, that for the human subject to emerge, some reduction must take place. Yeah. And that led me to Freud's culture and its discontents, that something also has to be reduced to culture to exist, right? And this something is sexual drive, or, something that has to be postponed, controlled, or repressed in the sexuality aspect. And so I just got thinking that when we talk about AI and the very name artificial intelligence, our debates is always about thinking, intelligence, the mind, and how we are going to be substituted, how we're going to become obsolete. Our thinking is always like that. And I wonder if the focus by the very naming of this cultural happening called artificial intelligence, isn't also a way of escaping this reality that is these digital machines, if they play us, they play with our desire. So I wonder if we could bring desire into this discussion about artificial intelligence, obsolescence. What is it in terms of obsolescence that gets also obsolete apart from the thinking? And I think the focus on the thinking maybe is part of a whole, way of posing the problem that actually obfuscates a little bit this thing that is so pervasive, which is it's actually taking our desire.
Yeah, no, I should confess that when I use the initials AI, I'm actually translating them as actual incompetence. So the issue there is, so what standard of performance and therefore competence is it that we're attributing to this technology? It seems to me it's an important sort of counterweight to say, all right, well, what about the affective world? And maybe even before desire, drive, right? So what's going on with that? And we don't, and by drive, we don't mean hard drive. We mean human drive, right? So,
hopefully some are hard.
Yes, well, when necessary. No, but, okay, let's think about Freud for a minute. I mean, civilization is discontent, right? I mean, he's worrying about what happens to aggressivity in the civilized world. We have to find a way to channel it. And he's not there worrying immediately about desire. He's worrying about the drive, right, to aggress someone, to hurt someone, to control someone. And society seems to be all about facilitating that. Now, I would say an equally interesting Freudian piece earlier is Beyond the Pleasure Principle. Because there, Lust, pleasure, right in the middle, right at the center of things. And connected with it is drive. So Trieb. So the English version is instinct, which is just wrong. He doesn't say that very much. And what is drive, right? It's something which persists despite being structured by a glitch. And he's trying to differentiate there between this sense of drive toward pleasure and something he wants to call the drive toward death, right? Totentrieb. What's interesting about the death drive is that it seems to be this insistent movement toward, it's translated as inanimacy. It's not inanimacy, it's inorganic. A drive towards something that's inorganic. And brilliantly, it seems to me there too, partly because he freaks out. He says, I can't just be advocating for death. He's saying, so I'm going to add something here, and that is that this returning to the inorganic is nevertheless remaining within bios. It's remaining within the sphere of life. And it may also then be regenerative. That the death drive is a cleansing that then actually enables something more. Now, what I'm going for here is the connection between the inorganic and the digital. And it strikes me that, yes, we want to say, we can't just think about it cognitively, conceptually. We want to think about it in terms of how the human experience is lived. And Freud has a lot of interesting things. I mean, not only about sex, but about things like death and aggression, et cetera. So I feel like, we want to be able to say these efforts to simulate some archive which contains everything we need to know doesn't contain what we don't need to know, or what we can never know, in the sense of what we will always forever be haunted by as a feeling, or as a drive, or as something pushing us toward even an object we are unaware of. It's not melancholy. It's not an object we know when we lost, and we're, it's a sense now of our being driven. I mean, I think that's the thing. And to me, there is room there for saying yes, and being driven is more than being thoughtful. It's a lot more than being thoughtful. So, we haven't yet, I think, dealt squarely with the challenges of what it means to actually simulate a life. Robotics are stupid. I mean, they can do certain kinds of things, but this idea of them actually being a prosthetic substitution, forget it. I mean, it's a corny film, but She is onto something. Right? This effort to produce desire at the locus of the ear between a voice and a worker. I mean, that's sort of going, yeah, you see, this is the question. So if we're not going to answer that kind of a question, what are we wasting our time for? So, but I take the point. We don't want to just obsess about the cognitive.
If I may, two very interesting points that you just brought was, first is the idea of the surprise, and coming back again to these structures of desire with these machines. So the pornographic sites, for instance, they have a visual structure of a mosaic, and even all the vertical scrolling. So this also touches in the structure of an infinite supply to satisfy desire. So this is one thing that what you just said reminded me. And the other one is aggression. How is it that these machines also are feeding on aggression, are feeding on anger? So these are just questions,
I agree.
that you brought now.
What's important is to not get distracted. What are we doing with aggression and AI? We're militarizing it. What if you didn't do that? Just take the toys away from them and see then what may also be possible. But that's, they're trying to hold that as tightly as they possibly can.
Hi, my name is Candice. I am a postdoctoral researcher here in visual history. And so I live in the world of images, and the eye is very important for me. And I'd be kind of curious for you to reflect a little bit about where the eye figures into these questions around the body and the metabolic rift. And I just wanted to share a little anecdote. I was presenting this workshop to young kids who I realized had never before held a camera to their eye. And the way in which they were born into using images was, of course, looking at it through a screen, or looking at a screen. And I had to think about how I was going to bring that relation of contact, which is kind of important to the history of producing images, how I was going to bring that back into a tangible kind of conversation with kids. So these questions around subjection, technique, maybe even prosthesis that you were talking about, kind of reminded me of this problem when thinking about how the camera intervenes into that relationship between the hand and the head. And so I was kind of curious how you reflect on the visual and the eye in relation to these questions. The technology.
I mean, I know that I tend to overcompensate for sort of standard emphasis on vision by going on and on about sound, but that doesn't mean vision is not relevant. Of course it is. I do think that the discussion within certain strains of psychoanalysis, that differentiates between seeing and vision is important. And what that has to do with is the difference between what we might also say is involved in watching and looking. So there's something about attention, right? And the sense of organizing the sensorium of the human to behave, to hold itself in a posture of attention. And so that strikes me as, playing with the distinction and how does it arise? Right? And, within the psychoanalytical community, on the one hand, you have that strong sort of reading of vision as being gaze, as being socially framed, as the way in which you're looking, right, is organized before you even open your eyes. You're looking at a field that already has meaning distributed in it. So something is the subject. And, the brilliant trends within feminist French psychoanalysts looked at that and said, hey, this is all about gender and reproduction. That's what's going on here. You're not seeing a world, you're seeing bathrooms named his and hers. That's because you've already got this screen in your vision. So that to me is an interesting set of observations. It's also the case that, a lot of the work in art history about perception, visual perception, has been very interested in how it is that assumptions about seeing are coded into the techniques for representing that which is seen. Depth of field, vanishing point, up, down, back, forth, all that stuff. And that is closer to that point you're making, which is a very good point about how it is that we take up a camera and learn something about what seeing is, even if we're not using it to photograph something. We're also just discovering its relation to our eye. So I don't mean to say this is not interesting or I don't care about it. I may not care enough about it, but that's different. I think that you want to sort of get at, okay, what are we trying to get to when we're saying, let's attend to the technological mediation of visual perception? And when I took off my glasses earlier, I'm aware of the fact that, right, that's a prosthesis. I have processed that into my sense of the world. And so, the question is always, is it in focus? Well, that's not really a question you ask until you need the prosthesis and you're relying on it in order to, and you don't discover that unless, some kind of need arises in terms of, for me, it was I could never see the blackboard in school. And people rightly assumed I was dumb and thought, well, maybe he should have his eyes checked. But then you come to rely on them and it's normal. It's absolutely. Now, I think you're also, you're going back to that discussion that's ongoing about the hierarchy of the senses, right? And, the question is, in what way is the hierarchy itself, never mind the various elements so hierarchized, the hierarchy itself been challenged by the kinds of technologies that are opening up in relation to the different senses that are being arrayed in the hierarchy? Is it now flat, for example? And that strikes me as an interesting challenge because we've long acted, as though the eye is, the center of the sensory hierarchy. And there's something to be said for the way in which it operates today, right? And it perhaps is in its most vital form, sad though it may be, in Kim Kardashian's selfies, right? What she's doing is saying, I am who I appear to myself to be. Love it, buy it, lust after it. That she's got a sense there of what that the camera will do for her and does to her, and what she depends on in relation to that machine. But, you know, Abu Hamdan, earshot, you know, so let's do it with a sound. Let's inscribe a sound in that kind of reproducible way. I mean, he turns it into an evidentiary thing. Thank God, you know, someone's demonstrating, you know, what the Israeli army is up to. But those things are all opportunities, I guess is all I'm saying, for exploring, okay, we thought this was the way it looked, doesn't, but what does it look like? Where are things now arrayed? And that's why I was saying flat. It might be a kind of a flat ontological or sensory system. The main one seems to me that is really emerging in prominence because of the pollution of the earth is the sense of smell.
I mean, speaking of Lawrence Abu Hamdan, it's a very interesting, and what I think we must hold on to in what you've given us, amongst the range of things, is the importance of the ways in which techniques might help us to think about the critical apparatus we have available for thinking the question of culture. And I think that we're in a space now of really pushing that pushing that question. I also, you know, I mean, in thinking about the metabolic rift, I was thinking about how limited our vocabulary is. It's John Bellamy Foster's, invocation of this concept that produced this irreconcilable distinction between countryside and town. That is no longer productive in the work that we do in this center. In thinking about questions of youth mobility, for example, I mean, that doesn't help us at all. And so, you know, there's something about the limits of the critical vocabulary that we've inherited in the humanities that might have been productive for a particular moment of an instantiation of the technological apparatus in the 40s and 50s that now seems post, you know, what has happened in Gaza and elsewhere to be of extreme limitation. And that taking care of the limit, as you taught me, is also, you know, being very, very aware of what it might mean to activate something else in that space of that limit.
But so, I just, one little teeny, I mean, one of the things that has, I think, become very important in this context is appreciating what it means to start thinking about quantum computing. Because what quantum physics discovered was precisely the kind of rift that one might associate with town and country, but it's also one that kept, you know, incompossibles. It kept trying to posing the question of, well, how are you thinking the edge there? How do you produce it? Anyways.
John Mowitt, thank you very, very much. Really appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you all.